Ashley Benefield, a former model and ballerina, finding herself at the center of a high-profile trial after being accused of shooting and killing her husband, Douglas Benefield. Claiming self-defense, Ashley's case sheds light on the complexities of domestic violence and the legal challenges that arise when trying to prove justifiable force. All this weekend on the Hidden Killers podcast, we're examining the case of Ashley Benefield, examining the events leading up to that fateful day in their Lakewood Ranch, Florida home, and the allegations of abuse Ashley made against Douglas. We're taking you to the courtroom for raw audio from the Stand Your Ground hearing of Ashley Benefield all weekend here on the Hidden Killers podcast.
All right, Ms. Conlone, I want to ask you a few questions with the help of my very able-bodied assistant, Mr. O'Keefe. And we're going to put a few of those photographs up. I want to ask you some questions about them.
If you're going to refer to any that are already in evidence, I'd prefer we use the ones that are already marked. If there's additional ones, then obviously you can lay the predicate or get a stipulation for admissibility. If you're looking for 23 through 26, those are here.
Wait a minute, I'm sorry. Is that the victim or the defendant?
These are photos of Miss Benefield.
That's what I mean.
And my notes reflect that 23 through 26 are photos from the night of the incident.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Conlone, let me direct your attention to the exhibit that is now up on the Elmo. I want to ask you, with respect to Miss Benefield's left side of the face, specifically the left eyelid, does that appear to be the same size as the eyelid on the right, or does it appear to be swollen?
Objection.
Yeah, I'm going to sustain. I mean, I can see that for myself. I don't need the witness to narrate what the evidence is. Unless there's something specific that you want to draw out about it, but
No, that's fine. The only other question I was going to ask was about the left cheek, Your Honor.
okay. But I also think that she didn't take these.
I understand.
Okay, go ahead. So I'm going to sustain.
Okay. With respect, Ms. Colon, to Ms. Benefield's left cheek, do you see that as swollen as compared to the right cheek?
Did you just
Sustained.
All right. Next. This was a photograph that was taken when?
That was the first night.
Okay. And this was taken by you?
No, that was taken by Megan.
By Megan. Are you familiar with this photograph?
I am.
All right. Does this photograph, it's hard to depict in this exhibit under the Elmo, does it show whether or not the scratch?
Objection, Judge.
Yeah.
Well, I understand, but let him finish the question. I don't know where he's going. It's not uncommon for lawyers to start this way and make a, not wrong turn, but left turn. So
I'll
go ahead.
withdraw the question.
Oh, no, ask your question, please, but I don't know where it was going.
I understand, but I also know what the ruling is, so.
If it's just to narrate
Out of
what's-
concern for the court's time.
Yeah, I
understand.
mean, and then you can argue that, certainly.
I'll be able to argue it too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
Okay, thank you.
Redirect?
Yes, briefly. Ms. Conlon, in your many years at the Sheriff's Office, you've responded to homicide scenes regularly?
Yes.
And is it your understanding from your experience that a lot happens prior to your actually getting called out?
Yes.
And so if you get a call out at 7:37, you can't say how long law enforcement had been on scene prior to your getting there, can you?
No.
Because in theory, patrol arrives first.
Correct.
And at some point, there's a determination that there's a homicide before the homicide unit gets called out?
Correct.
And are you next in line after the homicide
Yes.
unit? Okay.
Yes.
And you're not the person writing the search warrant. You just wait before you enter.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Nothing else, Judge.
Sir?
Nothing further.
All right, can this witness be released, State?
Yes.
Mr. Taylor? All right. May you release your subpoena. Thank you very much. Oh, yes.
Yeah, but, Your Honor, we have her under subpoena for tomorrow also.
Oh, well, hold on then. All right, ma'am, apparently you're still under subpoena.
Okay.
All right, so remain available. Thank you. Go ahead.
The state would call Dr. Vega.
Oh, you know what? Let me check real quick. Miss Sarah,
Yes.
how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
All right. If you need a break, you let me know.
Appreciate it. It is my intention to put the pictures up on the screen. I've spoken to the family and they agree that would be amenable. Because I don't think you can, the witness needs to point out things while you're looking at pictures.
I can see right here. I'm not going to get in the way of you presenting your case, but I'm fine if you want to put them on the overhead, and I'm fine if the witness is sitting right here, and Mr. Taylor could approach as well and see exactly where things are being pointed to without putting up the photos. Either way.
Just to remind, Your Honor, we have the Daubert motion pending as to this witness.
Correct.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this case to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do. Well, Dr. Vega is sitting down. The way I read the motion was specific to one particular injury.
Correct.
So let's do this. When we get to that point, and please feel free to disagree if you want. I think when we get to that point, object, so it's preserved, you have your contemporaneous, let the testimony finish, then you can cross on that, and then whether if I let it in, it's all there. And if I agree with you that the foundation hasn't been laid, or it's otherwise not admissible, then it's still proffered and it's in the record. Would that be okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Hello, sir. Make yourself comfortable in the chair, 12 to 15 inches from the microphone. Loud, clear voice will pick up everything, and it does adjust up, down, left, right. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Please state your name
My name is Russell Scott Vega. The last name is spelled Vega.
and where do you work?
I'm the Chief Medical Examiner for the 12th District of Florida, and that includes Manatee County, where we are now.
And what is the 12th Circuit?
It includes 3 counties, Manatee, as well as Sarasota to our south and DeSoto County to our east.
And you said Chief Medical Examiner. So what does that mean?
That means in the medical examiner's office, I supervise the other medical examiners. I set policy. I basically manage the office.
You're the boss.
Yeah.
Okay. And what is your education to do the job that you have?
I started in undergraduate, majoring in physics and biochemistry at Florida State University. Then I went to medical school after that, University of South Florida in Tampa. After medical school, I did 2 years of training in general surgery and then 4 years of training in anatomic and clinical pathology, and then a year of subspecialty training in forensic pathology.
Hold on 1 second, I'm sorry.
Your Honor, out of respect to the court's time and to Dr. Vega, whose credentials I'm familiar with, we're happy to recognize him as an expert.
All right. Are we willing to stipulate or accept that stipulation?
Yes, I do have a few more questions about specific things that he's done, though.
Okay.
Okay. And how long have you been the Chief Medical Examiner, if I didn't ask you already?
It will be 20 years October 1st.
Okay. As part of your duties as a Chief Medical Examiner, do you still perform autopsies and do the work that your other medical examiners would do?
Yes.
Okay. How often would you say you perform autopsies?
I'm on the schedule every month, so not necessarily on a weekly basis, but certainly on a monthly basis.
Okay. And over your career, how many autopsies would you say you've done approximately?
Yeah, and I don't have an exact count, but probably in the 3,500 to 4,000 range.
Okay. How many of those approximately would you say are gunshot wounds or contain some aspect of a gunshot wound?
It's in the hundreds, but I wouldn't be able to tell you more than that.
Is wound interpretation part of your duties as a medical examiner?
Yes.
Okay. And what exactly is wound interpretation, other than exactly what it sounds like?
It's being able to examine a body and identify injuries present on or in that body, and be able to, in that identification, determine what the nature of the injury is, possibly what kind of implement, tool, or weapon was associated with inflicting that injury, and other things about the nature of the injury, such as when it occurred, or things associated with the circumstances under which the injury was sustained.
Okay. Did you do the autopsy of Doug Benefield?
Yes, I did.
And when was that?
That autopsy was on September 28th of 2020.
Okay. And generally on Mr. Benefield, how many wounds did you find?
I found 2 clear gunshot wounds, 1 possible gunshot wound, and then 2 other separate smaller injuries, 1 to the head and 1 to the back of the thigh.
Okay. Were pictures taken during this autopsy?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to show you States Exhibit 30 through 38. You can just take a look at these. It's not coming on. Oh, because I think it's set to that. Do you recognize those?
I do.
And what are they?
These are photographs that were taken at the time of the autopsy of Mr. Benefield.
Okay. And do they accurately reflect the autopsy as you recall it, parts of the autopsy as you recall it?
Yes.
State would enter into evidence States 30 through 38.
Objection?
No.
Received? Are you going to publish them now?
Yeah.
Folks, the state is about to publish photographs that were taken during an autopsy. I would imagine that most people here probably have never attended an autopsy or seen photographs from an autopsy. I didn't see them, but I don't think they're the full autopsy.
No.
I would assume they're external
Yes.
photographs.
Yes.
However, for those of you who may have an emotional connection with this case, sometimes these can be very difficult to look at. So if you think that you might have some difficulties, I'm not worried. Sometimes I'm worried about a jury and an emotional response. I'm not worried about that. But just to avoid any distractions, if anybody thinks that they might have a reaction, please feel free to step out for a few minutes, and then you can step right back in. All right, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to show you States Exhibit 30 just so we understand who we're talking about. Is this the patient, Doug Benefield?
Yes, this is a photograph of the decedent.
The decedent.
Mr. Benefield, from the essentially mid-chest up.
Okay. And I'm going to show you the next exhibit, States 31. Can you tell me what we're looking at here?
Yes, so this is the decedent's right arm and the right side of his chest. And this shows 2 injuries, really one superficial injury to the right arm. And I can use the laser pointer if you like. Okay.
Judge, this is the wound that's the subject of the motion.
Understand, I'm going to reserve on the objection, and once I hear it, then I'll make a final ruling. But yes, noted.
So we see two injuries here, one on the chest here and one on the right arm. The chest really is a more complex injury. There are really three components here. There is what was circular gunshot perforation here. There is an incision that was made by doctors who were treating him in life-saving measures that was made from the edge of the gunshot wound downward here. That was to insert a chest tube or a tube to relieve pressure and blood from the chest cavity.
And I didn't ask you this, but sometimes people are pronounced deceased at a scene, and sometimes that happens at the hospital after medical intervention. And I think you've answered this, but which type was this?
This was the second type.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he had signs of medical intervention.
He did indeed.
And are you trained to identify that as opposed to an injury?
Yes, I am.
Okay. You can go ahead. So the top of that chest wound would be the bullet, more of the bullet entry wound.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
And then, go ahead.
In addition to that, there's also there is some bruising that's evident in the skin around that hole, and then separate from that is the arm wound here.
Okay. So let's talk specifically about the chest wound first.
Yes.
So this wound, I don't know if you said it first or if I said it first, was an entrance wound. How do you determine the difference between an entrance wound and an exit wound of a firearm?
Well, there are characteristics of the hole in the skin itself that can be helpful in that regard, but the easiest way to be able to tell the difference between an entrance and an exit is if you have one hole and the projectile still in the body, and you have a track between those 2 points.
Okay.
That's what we have here. So
okay.
that helped me be very confident that this was an entrance wound.
That's the entrance wound.
If you have two holes and no projectile, usually it's pretty clear, but it can be a little bit harder.
Okay. But in this case with the chest wound, was not difficult.
That's correct.
Okay. So this is State's Exhibit 32. It's a closer up image of the chest wound. Can you just point out where the bullet injury would be?
Yes, that's right here.
Okay. And then State's Exhibit 33 is the back of Mr. Benefield, and there's a lot of discoloring the top of the shoulders and the lower back. What is that?
Yes, so you're correct. This is his back, and just for clarification, this is the neck and the back of the head, the left ear, and there's this pink-purple discoloration here, but especially up here on the, let's just say the shoulder regions. That's lividity. Lividity is the pooling of blood that occurs in the body after death. That part of what we see is not injury or in any way related to what happened to him prior to his death. It's simply essentially what we would call an artifact or a post-mortem finding.
Okay, so this is the darkness that we're seeing here is just sort of a natural process.
This here and this here.
Okay.
That's correct.
And what about this picture is not a natural process?
Within this area that's not discolored, and the reason for that is that there was pressure on the skin here that prevented the blood from pooling after death, so that's why it's more pale. But in the at least contained within that zone is this smaller, darker purple area, and that is not lividity or a postmortem finding. That's associated with injury.
Okay. Did you inspect that area to find out what it was?
Yes.
Okay, and what was it?
I could palpate, I could feel a lump under that area of the back, and upon further examination by cutting the skin and examining underneath, there was a projectile there.
Okay, so I'm going to show you States 34. What are we looking at here?
This is a photograph that was taken after I had done the incision and essentially uncovered the projectile that was in the subcutaneous tissue, the tissue under the skin.
Okay.
And that's the projectile right there.
And during the autopsy, were you able to connect the path of the initial hole to this projectile.
Yes.
Okay. And if you could just explain what it went from which side to which side?
So, referring back to the photograph, if you will, we don't have to show it, but it was on the left side of the back, and the entrance wound that we saw was on the right side of the chest.
Okay.
So the path that the bullet took was across his chest from right to left.
Okay.
It was also somewhat from front to back. In considering a standing position, it was horizontal, roughly, meaning that the entrance wound was at the same height above the ground, if you were standing, that the bullet was found. So there was no significant upward or downward trajectory through the body.
Okay. So on that plane, it was fairly horizontal. It didn't go up or down much.
Yes.
Okay. So I just want to, I can either do it on myself or you can do it on me. So, or I can do it on me. Point to where the injury wound would be on you.
So on me, the entrance wound is basically where I'm pointing now.
And then the exit wound or where the projectile landed would be where?
Back here. I probably can't point quite as accurately on myself there. But
Okay. So there was a definite right to left motion of this projectile.
Definitely a right to left trajectory.
Okay.
Through his body.
So the next photo I want to show you is State's Exhibit 35. This is a different wound. This is the arm wound. Can you tell?
This is the arm?
Yes, this is the arm.
Yes, sir.
All right. Reserved.
And what can you tell me about what we're looking at here on the arm?
So the arm wound is a superficial wound. It's essentially a scrape of the skin. So the surrounding skin is normal, right? And then this area, the superficial part of the skin, what we might call the epidermis, and maybe a little bit of the skin underneath that, of the dermis underneath that, has been scraped away, and it leaves this red, irregularly shaped wound here.
Okay. And you said relatively superficial. So what does that mean?
That means that outside of the skin being scraped away, there's no deeper injury, there's no additional damage, there's no underlying injury to the bone or the soft tissues, there's no bruising. It's just this scraping of the skin, and that's it.
And being that it's superficial, does that limit your ability to determine where it came from or what it's from?
In this case, I would answer that yes. In general, sometimes the pattern or the nature of the appearance on the skin can give you a very clear idea of how that injury occurred. But in this case, it's a relatively irregular and what I would say not characteristic of any particular mechanism of injury.
Okay. If you had to make an educated decision about what you think this is, what is your opinion about that?
I think more likely than not, it is a...
I understand. I'm sorry, just, we have to get objections on the record. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Certainly.
Reserved.
More likely than not, it is a what I would call a grazing gunshot wound. Grazing gunshot wounds are wounds that just barely scrape across the skin in their path rather than going into the body. And so they leave a scrape pattern on the skin where they do that. Grazing gunshot wounds sometimes, frequently, have a much more characteristic appearance, and this one did not really have those characteristics. But given that we have two clear gunshot wounds in the body, and this additional injury could be, by its appearance, a grazing gunshot wound, I think it more likely than not that it is.
Okay. And you said it's not typical of a graze wound. What do you mean by that?
A typical grazing gunshot wound looks like a furrow or a trough across the skin. It's long, narrow, and typically it has characteristic shapes at either long end and has skin tag tears along the long edges, if you will. And this really didn't have any of those characteristics.
Okay. So that made it difficult to determine exactly what it was.
Yes.
Okay. Then I want to move to the leg wound. This is State's Exhibit 36. If you could orient us, what are we looking at here?
So this photograph is taken with the leg turned, and you're looking at the back surface of the leg. And when I say leg, I'm referring to the calf. So the part of the lower extremity, which is below the knee. So this is essentially where the knee is here.
Facing away from the camera is where the knee would be.
Correct, and behind the gloved hand. So this is the back of the calf, and the body here is turned over. So it makes the orientation a little bit more. I'm sorry, the leg is turned over, so it makes the orientation a little bit harder to see.
Okay.
But this is the back of the right leg, and the injury itself is, the hole here that's between the two parts of the ruler.
I'm going to zoom in on this. So if you could tell us, can you tell, first of all, is this a gunshot wound?
Yes.
And is this an entrance wound or an exit wound?
This is an entrance wound.
And how do you tell it's an entrance wound?
An entrance wound typically has a round or oval shape based on whether or not the projectile is going into the skin from a perpendicular, straight-on orientation or at somewhat of an angle. The angle creates the oval shape typically, and this is an oval shape here. It has some scraping or abrasion at the edges of the wound here, and those characteristics are typical for an entrance wound.
Okay. So you mentioned oval shape is indicative of a projectile coming at an angle?
Yes.
Okay. So that would be as opposed to maybe from side to side of the calf, it is at some sort of an angle.
Well, it could be side to side as a comparison, but the main thing is to think of it as not being at a perpendicular angle to the skin. So that angle, you could have an oval which is horizontally oriented because the angle is like that to the skin.
Yes.
Or you could have an oval which is vertically oriented, like this one is, because the angle is up and down related to the skin.
So with reference to this entrance wound, assuming someone were standing, so that would be the normal anatomical positioning?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So the angle of this entrance wound would be coming from which direction? Coming from where?
From below the level of where the hole is. So it would be coming from essentially the floor.
Okay. So if someone were standing and someone were laying on the floor, they could shoot up and maybe get this angle.
Yes.
We're not saying that's what happened. It could happen.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to show you the next, which is State's, I have to close it. State's Exhibit 37. What are we looking at there?
So this is the right leg seen from a different perspective. We were looking before at the right leg twisted from the left side of the body. Now we're looking at the right leg untwisted from the right side of the body.
Okay, so when you say twisted, as we're looking at that leg now, when you took the picture before, twisted this way, you mean?
Yes. And
Okay.
Let me.
You could show.
It was rotated like this.
Perfect.
So that you could see the back of the leg.
Thank you. So now the leg is flipped back, and what are we looking at here?
So this is the right knee here, This is the right leg, right foot. And this is the exit hole for the gunshot that started with the entrance that we just saw previously. And that's just below, but basically on the side of the right knee.
And I have one more picture, a little closer up of this. So let me back up a minute. Where would the entrance wound approximately be on this picture?
So the entrance wound is back here at more or less this level, where we can't see it because it's on the underside of the leg. And even if this rail were not here and you could see the entire leg, you probably wouldn't see it because it's on the back of the leg, not the side.
Okay. And then the last picture that's a little closer up, I just want to ask you, how can you tell that's an exit wound?
As opposed to the previous entrance wound that we saw, which was an oval hole, this looks more like a tear in the skin, and that is characteristic of exit wounds. This tear is irregular and V-shaped. Exit wounds tend to have non-predictable, irregularly shaped tears in the skin, and this is pretty common appearance for an exit wound. And as I described previously when we were talking about the chest wound, being able to pair two holes together, the sort of features that make one hole an entrance and one an exit are amplified when you see the two together, and one is characteristic of an entrance, the other is characteristic of an exit. That makes it a much more certain determination. Sometimes you have two wounds, both of them can look more like entrances, and then it might be hard to tell which is which. They might look more like exits, depending on individual characteristics in that particular case. But in this case, pretty straightforward. The one we previously described looks like an entrance. This looks like an exit, so that's the pairing.
Okay. And the path went straight through?
Yes.
Did the projectile hit bone, or was it just tissue?
It did hit bone.
Bone, okay.
Yeah.
So if you could just verbally say, what was the directionality of this wound path?
So this wound traversed the leg in an upward angle from the back toward the front, and also from the left toward the right.
Okay. So are you able to, let's assume that there were 3 shots. Let's assume that one's a graze wound. So one shot was found inside the body, one went through and through the leg, and then there was a graze wound. Are you able to say which one of those happened first?
No.
Okay. And why not?
Sometimes wounds that are in the same part of the body, especially, say, gunshot wounds through the head, the fracture pattern can tell you that. But if you don't have something like that, there aren't physiological features that allow you to time them unless there's been so much time between that there's healing, for instance.
Right.
So there was none of that here.
Okay.
So there were just simply no physiological findings that would allow me to tell which came first.
And also, do you have limitations on being able to ascertain where the shooter was versus where the victim was when shots were fired?
Well, one thing that being able to determine an entrance and an exit through the body, or in the case of the chest wound, the entrance and the location of the projectile within the body, it allows you to determine the relative position of the gun when it was fired relative to the body of the decedent.
Okay.
So that gives you some of that information, but not all of it, because a gun can be held in different ways. It can be held toward the body or away from the body. It can be held at different heights and locations relative to the shooter. So some information, yes, but not. It doesn't allow you to tell you entirely where they were relative to one another.
If it can tell you where the gun is in relation to where the body is, it doesn't necessarily tell you where the shooter's body was positioned, only that the gun must have been at this angle. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
There is more to come in the Ashley Benefield Stand Your Ground hearing. We're bringing it to you all weekend long here on the Hidden Killers podcast. Press subscribe so you don't miss a minute of courtroom coverage. I'm Tony Bruschi. Stay with us.